Scientists say that a snow drought likely contributed to that deadly avalanche and say the risk is still high for another one to hit the Sierra.
Lake Tahoe is known as the jewel of the Sierra Nevada. A lake so clear that scientists could lower a simple white disk into the water and watch it disappear more than 60 feet below the surface. But in 2024, as the lake's water level dropped, researchers decided to investigate what had been hiding beneath its crystal-clear waters. As their remotely operated vehicle descended nearly 1,600 feet below the surface, its cameras uncovered abandoned cars, leaking industrial chemical barrels, and even what appeared to be human remains. But how could these things end up in one of the clearest lakes in America? And most importantly, what's being done to them? Let's get into it. The perfect lake. Lake Tahoe sits 6,225 feet above sea level, right on the border of California and Nevada, in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It is the largest alpine lake in North America and the second deepest lake in the United States, with only Crater Lake being deeper. At its deepest point, Lake Tahoe reaches an incredible depth of 1,645 feet. That is so deep that if you placed the Empire State Building at the bottom, the entire building would disappear beneath the water, with hundreds of feet still above its roof. However, Lake Tahoe was not always a lake. Powerful movements in the Earth's crust pushed the Sierra Nevada and Carson Range upward, while the land between them slowly sank. This created a massive basin with steep, rocky walls, and over thousands of years, snowmelt and rain filled that basin, forming the lake we see today. However, what makes this lake so famous is not its size or depth. The water is so clear that on a calm day you can see nearly 60 feet below the surface. Unlike most lakes, Tahoe contains very little algae, mud, or organic material. The surrounding mountains are made mostly of granite, which washes very little sediment into the lake. And what makes this process even more effective is the temperature of the water. The lake stays cold throughout the year, with temperatures ranging from around 40 degrees Fahrenheit in winter to about 20 degrees Celsius in late summer. These cold temperatures slow the growth of plants, algae, and microorganisms. As a result, you get a lake that looks more like a giant natural mirror. However, that clarity is disappearing. Scientists noticed that they could only see up to 62 feet below the surface. That number was more than 100 feet. And how did one of the clearest lakes on Earth lose nearly 40% of its clarity in just a few decades? From clear to cloudy. Before World War II, Lake Tahoe was one of the most remote places in California. Getting there was difficult. The roads through the Sierra Nevada were rough even during good weather. In winter, the roads were completely blocked by snow, making it almost impossible to reach the lake. Only a few thousand people lived around it. But then came war, and it changed Lake Tahoe forever. Military camps and training facilities were established around the region. Roads were improved. Thousands of soldiers saw Lake Tahoe for the first time. When the war ended in 1945, the United States entered one of the biggest economic booms in its history. Millions of veterans returned home with steady jobs, affordable home loans, and, for the first time, many middle-class families owned cars. At the same time, new highways made the lake easier to reach. Roads were upgraded even further before the 1960 Winter Olympics at Squaw Valley, turning what had once been a remote mountain lake into a destination that millions could easily visit. Lake Tahoe quickly became one of America's favorite vacation spots. Tourism exploded. On the Nevada side, where gambling was legal, large casino resorts opened one after another. The Cal Neva Lodge became one of the most famous resorts on the West Coast, attracting celebrities, gamblers, and wealthy tourists. Hotels, restaurants, ski resorts, vacation homes, and the iconic A-frame cabins spread rapidly around the shoreline. Between 1960 and 1980, The permanent population of the Tahoe Basin grew from about 10,000 people to more than 50,000. Millions of tourists arrived every year, and the local economy generated millions of dollars through tourism, construction, real estate, and gambling. From the outside, it looked like the region was improving, but at the same time, it created a huge problem for the lake. Thousands of tons of waste, and all of it had to go somewhere. The waste problem. New hotels, new casinos, road expansion projects, all of that growth created waste. And in those days, there were very few rules about where that waste had to go. For businesses around Lake Tahoe, the lake itself became the answer. Construction companies dumped broken concrete, steel, and lumber into the water. Old cars and trucks were pushed off cliffs or driven into the lake, many of them still carrying gasoline, motor oil, and battery acid. Businesses servicing the growing casino industry also discarded their chemical waste into the lake. Investigations have also documented discarded appliances, machinery, and other equipment scattered across the lake floor. At the time, few people questioned it. Lake Tahoe is vast, with its depths reaching 1,645 feet. To many people, it seemed almost bottomless. If something disappeared beneath the surface, it was gone forever. But Lake Tahoe was unlike most lakes. Anything that sank didn't stay in shallow water. It slowly disappeared into the cold, dark depths, where almost no one could ever find it again. The near-freezing water also meant there were very few microbes to break anything down. Whatever ended up on the bottom, almost untouched for decades. So the dumping continued. This wasn't unique to Lake Tahoe. Throughout the 1940s, 1950s, and even into the early 1960s, many lakes and rivers across the United States were used as convenient dumping grounds. By the late 1960s, public concern about pollution was growing across America. New environmental laws were introduced, and in 1969, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency was established to help protect the lake. The creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970 and the Clean Water Act in 1972 helped end many of these dumping practices. Scientists carefully measured water clarity, algae growth, and pollution near the shoreline. Yet almost nobody looked more than 1,000 feet below the surface because the technology didn't exist at the time. From the outside, Lake Tahoe still looked crystal clear. Until 2024, when the lake started showing signs that something had been hidden beneath its surface all along. The drought. Lake Tahoe's water level doesn't stay still. Every year, it rises and falls depending on how much snow falls in the Sierra Nevada. However, in 2020, things became worse than anyone expected. Lake Tahoe lost nearly 1.9 feet of water in just 1 year. Between June 2020 and June 2021, the lake dropped another 3 feet. Then, on October 12, 2021, for the first time in years, the water level fell below its natural rim at 6,223 feet above sea level. As the water level dropped, the shoreline changed dramatically. In some places, the water pulled back by nearly 200 yards. But the falling water revealed something no one expected. It exposed the lake's past. Hikers and local residents noticed old debris scattered along the shoreline. Then divers began investigating what had really been going on beneath the lake. The nonprofit Clean Up the Lake, which has been cleaning Lake Tahoe since 2018, launched its largest survey yet. Between May 2021 and May 2022, divers circled the lake's entire 72-mile shoreline. They recovered more than 25,000 pounds of trash, including 24,797 individual items, along with bottles and cans, engine blocks, broken boats, cameras from the 1980s that had been underwater for decades. Divers only searched down to about 25 feet. Going much deeper is dangerous and impossible for humans to do safely for long periods. That meant almost all of Lake Tahoe especially its 1,645-foot deep basin, had never been properly explored. If researchers wanted to know what was really hiding on the lake floor, they needed something that could go where no diver could: the dive into darkness. Reaching the deepest parts of Lake Tahoe isn't easy. Scuba equipment is generally limited to around 60 feet, and even most experienced divers can't go past 130 feet. The only way to see what lies at the bottom of Lake Tahoe is to send a machine down instead. So, in September 2025, the Tahoe Fund and the Restoring the Lake Depths Foundation did exactly that. They deployed an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, called Deep Emerald. It was specially built for deep water exploration. It had 8 thrusters, powerful LED lights, a 4K camera, and a 1,960-foot fiber optic cable connecting it to a research vessel on the surface. That fiber optic cable allowed researchers to receive clear, high-resolution video from nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. With everything ready, Deep Emerald slowly began its descent into the clear blue water. At first, the water was crystal clear. Sunlight easily passed through the upper layers, making the lake look bright and blue. But as Deep Emerald descended, the light slowly began to fade. By around 100 feet, the sunlight had become much weaker. At 200 feet, the last traces of natural light disappeared completely. From that point on, the ROV was surrounded by total darkness, with only its powerful LED lights showing the way. By 500 feet, the temperature had dropped to near freezing and would not change again for the rest of the descent. At 1,000 feet, the pressure outside was more than 30 times greater than at sea level. But the ROV kept going. At 1,570 feet, the cameras captured what researchers described as resembling a deep blue star field. These are tiny particles of soft sediment, called flocculent material, that drift up from the lake bed, and under the ROV's lights, they look like slow-moving stars. And on the lake bed itself, tires, anchors, glass bottles, metal debris from eras that were clearly not recent. As the ROV's lights swept across the lake floor, they revealed dozens of large cylindrical objects. At first, researchers couldn't tell what they were, but as the cameras moved closer, the answer became clear. They were industrial drums, the kind used to store and transport chemicals. Looking at them, one thing was obvious. These barrels hadn't ended up there by accident. Somebody had deliberately dumped them there. As researchers continued mapping the lake floor, they discovered that the barrels weren't all in one place. Some were grouped, while others were scattered across different parts of the lake. This suggested the dumping had happened many times over several years. However, as researchers were watching the screens, they noticed that some of the barrels were no longer completely sealed. Some had small cracks and ruptures. Faint, cloudy plumes could be seen drifting out of those barrels. As there were almost no currents at that depth, the material hung in the water like a thin cloud, slowly spreading around the barrels. Using the ROV's sampling equipment, they carefully collected water as close as possible to the leaking barrels. The samples were then brought back to the surface and sent to laboratories for chemical analysis. Little did the researchers know that the laboratory results would confirm their worst fears. The water analysis. The water contained high levels of heavy metals, including lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. It also contained industrial solvents and other chemicals that have been banned under modern environmental laws for decades. These weren't naturally occurring minerals from the lake itself. They were the chemical fingerprints of industrial waste that had been sitting at the bottom of Lake Tahoe for nearly 70 years. At first, researchers believed the contamination might still be trapped in the deep water. After all, Lake Tahoe is more than 1,645 feet deep. and the water below, about 500 feet, rarely mixes with the surface. That same natural layering had hidden the barrels for decades, but the laboratory results suggested something different. The contamination wasn't staying at the bottom. Researchers also detected traces of these heavy metals at shallower depths, showing that some of the chemicals were slowly moving upward through the water column. The process wasn't fast. It had taken decades, but it was happening. That meant the pollution wasn't just a problem for the deepest parts of the lake anymore. It was gradually spreading through one of America's most famous freshwater lakes. For nearly 70 years, the consequences of decisions made during the post-war boom had remained hidden beneath the surface. Now, scientists finally had evidence that those decisions were still affecting Lake Tahoe today. But the leaking barrels weren't the only thing the ROV cameras discovered in the darkness. The lake's darkest rumors. For decades, Lake Tahoe has been surrounded by another mystery, one that has nothing to do with pollution. It has to do with organized crime. During the late 1940s and 1950s, Lake Tahoe changed into one of America's biggest casino destinations. Hotels, luxury resorts, and casinos brought thousands of visitors to the area. But according to historical records, they also attracted organized crime figures who were involved in the casino business at the time. One of the best-known examples was the Cal Neva Lodge, located on the California-Nevada border. The resort was later partly owned by Frank Sinatra, and historical records show that Sam Giancana, one of Chicago's most powerful mafia bosses, was a frequent visitor. In 1963, the Nevada Gaming Commission suspended Sinatra's gaming license because of his association with Giancana. That part of the story is well documented. What isn't documented is what happened to people who supposedly disappeared during those years. For decades, local residents have shared stories that some victims of organized crime were dumped into Lake Tahoe. The rumors spread because the lake seemed like the perfect place to hide a body. One of the most famous legends involves Jacques Cousteau. According to the story, he explored Lake Tahoe's depths and later refused to talk about what he saw, supposedly saying that the world isn't ready. But there is no evidence that Cousteau ever explored Lake Tahoe. His family and colleagues have repeatedly said the story is false, yet the legend has survived for decades. Not because anyone proved it, but the conditions at the bottom of Lake Tahoe make it seem believable. And those same conditions were exactly what researchers encountered when their ROV began exploring the deepest parts of the lake. The final discovery. As researchers reviewed hours of footage from the deepest parts of the lake, they noticed something else mixed in with the industrial debris. Luggage, pieces of clothing, and in several locations, what appeared to be human remains. There is a real example that shows just how powerful this effect can be. In 2011, the body of Donald Christopher Windecker, who drowned in Lake Tahoe in 1994, was recovered after 17 years underwater. Because of the lake's cold temperatures, his body was found to be remarkably well preserved. Even so, officials have not confirmed that the deep survey footage contains human remains. Law enforcement agencies have only stated that the footage is under review and that any evidence of criminal activity will be investigated appropriately. So, where does all of this leave us? The leaking barrels are a real environmental problem, but removing them from nearly 1,600 feet below the surface could release even more toxic chemicals into the lake. The possible human remains create another challenge. If they are ever confirmed, recovering them would require expensive deep water operations. And if they are connected to crimes from 50 to 70 years ago, many witnesses are gone. Many companies no longer exist, or leave them where they are and continue monitoring the lake. Lake Tahoe still looks as beautiful as ever, Its clear blue water continues to attract millions of visitors every year. But this discovery reminds us just how far human activity can reach, even into places we once believed were untouched. So, after hearing all of this, what do you think? Can we bring Lake Tahoe's crystal clear waters back to what they once were? Or is the damage already too great to undo? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more crazy stories like this. We'll see you in the next one.